Once chamber Sodargye Mijang on Monum chamber Ngabjata, Bagaradargam Santo Shermando, Tombate Jejana Kishams. Nature Tering Jankams, Javarti Kishan, Alarman, Jimmy Panzo, Sorat, Gorget Tobambo, Shingi Low.
The supreme, profound, and wondrous Dharma is difficult to encounter even in millions of eons. Now that we have the chance to hear and receive it, may we realize the Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the supreme bodhicitta. Next, we will continue our study of Entering the Middle Way, composed by Chandrakirti. In Entering the Middle Way, we are currently discussing the realization of prajna paramita attained by bodhisattvas on the sixth bhumi. Specifically, we are at the section on the refutation of the four types of arising. We have already finished refuting self-arising, and now we are looking at refuting arising from other. The refutation of arising from other is divided into two parts, the general refutation and the specific refutation. Among these, the general refutation has been completed. Now we are on the specific refutation, which is also divided into two aspects. First, refuting arising from other when cause and effect occur sequentially. Second, refuting arising from other when cause and effect occur simultaneously. We are within the section on sequential cause and effect. Here there's a second part, refuting the opponent's reply. And that part itself has two pieces, their response and then our refutation of it. Today we will continue with this topic. According to the view of Nagarjuna, all phenomena, whether on the ultimate level or the relative level, cannot be established as truly arising. This reasoning has already been explained quite clearly. Therefore, regarding this profound teaching, everyone should really think deeply about it. Since we have obtained this precious human body and encountered our fundamental teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha's ultimate prajna paramita teachings, it is truly rare and extraordinary. So we should cherish this opportunity, even though we can no longer gather together to listen to the Dharma as we did in the past. The power of dependent origination is actually inconceivable. Therefore, for many of us to receive the core teachings in this way is also completely fine. We also know that systematic study and resources on this subject are quite limited. Oftentimes people might get a brief teaching or share some fragmented instructions, which does happen. But a systematic approach or a comprehensive teaching on great sutras and shastras being taught systematically, text by text, is relatively rare. Even when it exists, it is often not publicly available. Perhaps especially overseas, many resources are not free and come with various restrictions. However, my teachings here come with no other requirements. Since everyone has this connection and good fortune, you should joyfully receive it. But people often have this failing. If a teaching is expensive or kept secret, they feel they must obtain it. But if it is publicly available, they feel indifferent. This is truly a pity. So from the perspective of various causes and conditions, this opportunity is extremely precious. In reality, whether it is our own lives or external and internal conditions, many things are beyond our control. Therefore, to have such a connection in this lifetime is indeed very rare. Furthermore, as we are now studying the middle way, even if we only contemplate a little bit on the teachings of emptiness and non-arising, it will become the cause to destroy samsara. I have quoted a stanza before. Those of little merit do not even develop a questioning attitude toward this Dharma. Yet one who generates even the slightest inquiry into it can destroy the three realms of existence. Aryadeva said that in our world, people with little merit find it hard to generate even a reasonable doubt about whether all phenomena are truly empty. But if one can generate a slight reasonable doubt, thinking that all phenomena might be empty and non-arising, then just this single thought can destroy the root of the three realms of existence, freeing them from taking rebirth in samsara again. So it is truly extraordinary to be able to hear these teachings in this lifetime, and everyone should treasure this virtuous teaching. The opportunity we are providing to you is actually not so easy to arrange. Truly, nothing in life comes effortlessly. However, as long as it benefits everyone, I will try my best to provide it. That is why we are studying Entering the Middle Way now, and I hope we can complete it this year. Having one class a week should not be too much pressure for all of you. As for myself, there are many internal and external factors, so I am also considering whether I can deliver it on schedule. Regardless, let us all work hard and walk this path together. If we cannot finish this year, we will do it next year. If not next year, we can try again in a few years. Actually, many transmissions of scriptures are like this. Some take 5 years to complete, just like our Shurangama Sutra class, where various things naturally happen along the way. So let us make an effort together. Next, we will discuss the response and refutation, which is divided into two aspects. The opponent uses an analogy to explain, just as the two ends of a balance scale rise and fall simultaneously, so too are the produced effect and the producing cause. The opponent, this is the place, right? The opponent provides an analogy to explain what does. They argue that cause and effect do not necessarily have to occur at different times. They can also arise simultaneously. For instance, like a seesaw or a balance scale, these things have two ends. When one end goes down, the other end goes up. They believe cause and effect work the same way. Just like the scale or seesaw, as this side goes down, that side goes up. By the same logic regarding cause and effect, when the seed perishes, the sprout begins to grow. Therefore, it is in this state, rising and falling simultaneously. They do not occur at different times, they occur simultaneously. So much like the movement of a balance scale, cause and effect are not occurring at different times, rather they can happen simultaneously. Thus, so too are the produced effect and the producing cause. For the produced effect and the producing cause, their arising and ceasing can coexist at the same time. In other words, it makes sense, at least on this view, that the effect arises at the very same moment the cause ceases. When the opponent brings up this analogy, we might also feel, yes, it probably works like that. Don't many people today also say, as the cause ceases here, the effect arises there? Including in some worldly subjects like observing sunflowers or certain insects during experiments, we often see that as the seed part gradually perishes, the sprout part gradually grows. It seems as if these two phenomena are occurring simultaneously. So this explanation seems plausible. In fact, such expressions or ways of speaking can be accepted on the relative level, but they are not truly rigorous or precise. When we examine them using absolute reasoning, they simply cannot be established. Therefore, we will now begin to refute the opponent's view. This refutation is presented in three aspects. First, we state our thesis, and then we use reasoning to refute their position. What are we refuting? We are refuting the idea that there can be a function without an effect. We are proceeding with this refutation. This is also divided into three parts, the first of which is stating the thesis. If they are simultaneous, this does not exist. So to our opponents who use the analogy of the balance scale to claim that cause and effect can arise and cease at the same time, this explanation is actually unreasonable. Why is it unreasonable? While you might say in the analogy that the two sides exist simultaneously, like on a seesaw, where there is an end on this side and an end on that side, these two ends exist at the exact same time as both sides are established simultaneously. Having both ends exist at the same time can be considered valid. So from the perspective of the analogy, we can accept that this makes sense. The same applies to the scale, where weighing anything means if the object is heavy, one end drops and the other goes up. If it is light, the opposite happens. These kinds of situations can indeed happen in real life, but when you really look at what simultaneous means here, this is just a hypothetical way of speaking. It only works within the analogy. You believe these phenomena occur at the same time, which might seem acceptable and reasonable in the context of the analogy. But when applied to cause and effect, this explanation cannot be established. How is it not established? We have already analyzed this earlier. Because cause and effect do not exist at the same time. When the cause is present, the effect has not yet arisen, and when the effect has arisen, the cause has already completely ceased. If the effect appeared while the cause had not yet ceased, meaning both occurred at the same time, that would lead to the fallacy of simultaneous cause and effect. If cause and effect were fully present together at the seed stage, there would be no need for the effect to arise at all. Since the effect already exists perfectly upon the cause, there is no need for it to be produced again. Alternatively, we could say the seed would only directly produce another seed, and the effect would never arise. There are many such logical flaws. So our common belief that cause and effect occur simultaneously is actually quite mistaken and unreasonable. Using this analogy to explain cause and effect is therefore flawed, because cause and effect are phenomena that cannot arise at the same time. Thus it is completely contradictory to use phenomena that happen at the same time as an analogy for things that cannot occur simultaneously. Because time has a sequential order, and a preceding cause giving rise to a subsequent effect also follows an order. Yet your analogy lacks this sequence. Such an analogy is completely unreasonable, which means your view cannot be established. This does not exist means the kind of cause and effect you describe does not exist anywhere in the world. The analogy you just provided merely shows two things relating to and depending on each other. Beyond that, there's no cause and effect that truly exist as separate, distinct things. Next, we will present our demonstration through logical reasoning. What is arising is approaching arising, so it does not exist. What is ceasing is said to be approaching cessation. How can these two be like a scale? Let us demonstrate this using reasoning. Because you just claimed that cause and effect arise at the same time. But in reality, this is simply impossible. Why is it impossible? Because in this context, arising and ceasing actually cannot be established. First, from the perspective of the effect, it is currently arising. Currently arising means it is approaching arising. To say the effect is currently arising means it is approaching arising, but has not yet fully arisen. If it has not fully arisen, it is a future phenomenon, as it is only heading toward arising. For example, if I am preparing to go to Lhasa, preparing to go or currently going, cannot be called having arrived in Lhasa. Therefore, your claim is not reasonable. Then regarding approaching cessation, this means the cause is currently ceasing. Currently ceasing means the cause is on the way toward cessation. So this cause is a present phenomenon, as it has not yet ceased. Approaching cessation simply means it has not ceased yet. It refers to a phenomenon that still presently exists. Thus, cause and effect cannot be accepted as simultaneous. One is a phenomenon that is currently ceasing, and the other is a phenomenon that is currently arising. Arising and ceasing are inherently contradictory phenomena, so ordinarily without careful examination, many people might truly believe, then cause and effect must exist simultaneously. Just like we mentioned earlier, when some plants are beginning to sprout, the seed appears to slowly wither away. This also applies to concepts like parents giving birth to a child. But in fact, these are just coarse concepts which are merely conventions and ways of speaking in our worldly life. Regarding the relationship between cause and effect, we can certainly think this way in our conceptual thoughts. However, while we can think this way, what we say and what we think does not necessarily truly exist in the nature of things. Therefore, when we examine phenomena here, we ask, do cause and effect possess an inherently existent otherness in their very nature? If they were inherently distinct entities, then cause and effect would either have to be simultaneous or not. But for distinct entities that are not simultaneous, when one exists, the other does not. For instance, as we discussed earlier, if the cause has completely ceased when the effect is present, then these two cannot be called inherently distinct entities. Otherwise, we would have to admit that I and the son of a barren woman are also distinct entities. Furthermore, if the cause is currently ceasing, then before the cause has ceased, the effect has not yet arisen. So the relationship between cause and effect is just like the relationship between a cause and the son of a barren woman. A cause that is in the process of ceasing but has not yet ceased, and an effect that is in the process of arising but has not yet arisen, cannot be established as distinct entities. In this way, for all these worldly phenomena, no matter what the circumstances are, a true relationship of distinct entities between cause and effect is actually very difficult to establish. Because as long as the seed is present, the sprout can be said to still be in a future state. If the sprout has already formed, the seed has already completely ceased by then. Therefore, it is impossible for the two to ever exist simultaneously. In this case, the analogy of the scale you used just now is completely unacceptable. It is only on the relative level that we can speak this way or recognize it within our conceptual thoughts. But a true relationship of distinct entities between cause and effect is actually very difficult to establish. This is merely a worldly convention. When we examine these conventional rules using reasoning, we will understand this completely. In our current study of the middle way, we are primarily refuting arising from other. The process of refuting arising from other actually overturns our everyday notions. We ordinarily believe that arising from other exists, or that self-arising exists. We believe that I exist and you exist, and that a vase exists and a pillar exists. Within our habits and our attachments, there are many such deep-rooted concepts. Furthermore, we believe all these concepts are truly existent, but in reality they are merely illusions. When we truly analyze them, phenomena possessing inherent existence do not exist. Yet we ordinary beings still do not understand this. Even when clearly told that they do not exist, we still believe they do. For example, imagine a somewhat naive child who says, "There is a rainbow over there and I really like it." An elder nearby kindly and patiently tells him that the rainbow does not actually exist, but the child feels that whatever his eyes can see must surely exist. He thinks, "This rainbow is so colorful and beautiful, I want to have it." This leaves the elder in a rather awkward position, because the truth has already been clearly explained. Although all phenomena appear at the very moment of their appearance, they do not truly exist. Therefore, we should understand the importance of studying the middle way and try to comprehend it in this manner. If we can understand the reasoning behind refuting arising from other, it will bring great benefit to our practice and help reduce our attachments. Next, now we'll refute the idea that there can be a function of arising even when there's no effect at all. Arising without an agent of function is also unreasonable. The opponent continues to defend their position. What is their defense? They say, yes, when you of the middle way school refute us, there are certain things we have to admit regarding the seed as the cause and the sprout as the effect, that the two exist at the same time. We truly have no evidence to prove this view. We admit that it is impossible for cause and effect, or the seed and the sprout, to exist simultaneously. But even if the seed and sprout are not simultaneous, a certain function of theirs should still exist. For example, if a seed is going to cease, its causal function of ceasing should exist. That is to say, the function of cessation must exist. Likewise, when the sprout arises, its causal action of arising, or its function of currently arising, must also exist. So the opponent believes that although the seed and sprout do not exist simultaneously, their activities or functions do occur at the same time. Because the sprout currently arising and the seed currently ceasing, these are also particular causal functions. Therefore, they argue that these two functions should exist simultaneously. In response to this, Chandrakirti states here, arising without an agent of function is also unreasonable. Now let's refute the opponent. Whether we look at this kind of arising from the absolute level or the relative level, the same problem comes up. If there's no agent to begin with, how could its action possibly exist? For instance, if the agent I exists, then the action or behavior of me running outside can also exist. Similarly, if the seed exists as an agent, the action of currently ceasing performed by the seed can be established. Since the seed is the agent of cessation and currently ceasing is its specific behavior, the function of this cessation can be established. Furthermore, if the effect exists, its action of currently arising, meaning this arising, could also exist. However, if the seed as the cause and the sprout as the effect do not exist as agents themselves, how could the action and function you mentioned possibly exist? This is simply impossible to establish. So generally speaking, here's the principle. If a phenomenon's agent doesn't exist in its own right, then everything associated with it, its function, its color, its shape, all of it simply doesn't exist either. Just as the son of a barren woman does not exist, concepts like the son of a barren woman has died, or the son of a barren woman was just born, do not exist in the world either. The son of a barren woman is an analogy representing something that has never arisen. Therefore, during debates in Buddhist logic or when studying the middle way, we mention the son of a barren woman every single day. I heard that in the past when monks debated, some local Tibetan lay people would listen nearby. As they listened, they became quite puzzled. They wondered, these monastics debate every day about a woman's son. What woman? Whose son? Why do these monastics debate every day about whether a woman has a son or not? Why is that? Feeling bewildered, they would go and ask others about it. Such things did happen. So sometimes when we are listening to the teachings, there can be some misunderstandings regarding the terminology. Such situations do occur. I am quite used to it now. I frequently quote analogies like the son of a barren woman, a rabbit's horns, or the hair of a tortoise. These are commonly used in Buddhist logic and the middle way teachings. I also use them when I teach. So sometimes, how should I put it, there can also be misunderstandings regarding the present time and the past. A couple of days ago, I heard someone say I think they were studying the way of the Bodhisattva or words of my perfect teacher, and they had just been watching a video teaching. While watching the video around the 90th class or so, they saw that I was perhaps ill at the time, giving the teaching while receiving an IV drip. Then they suddenly asked me, "You were very sick yesterday. Are you feeling a bit better today?" Later I found out that they were watching a video of me teaching from almost 20 years ago, but they thought I was teaching just yesterday. So I replied, "I am a little better today." Since it happened 20 years ago, a long time has passed. So they greeted me based on something from 20 years ago, thinking, "You might be teaching right now, or when you were teaching yesterday, you were on an IV drip. Are you feeling a bit better today?" And I replied, "I am a bit better today." Everything that they regarded as truly real are actually like dreams and illusions. So my response was quite fitting. Therefore, here we are also discussing what? Actually, in the Shalistamba Sutra, the analogy of the balance scale is also used to describe cause and effect existing simultaneously. However, what is explained in this sutra does not mean that cause and effect truly exist at the exact same time. What is the actual intent of the sutra? In reality, the concept and expression of the cessation of the cause and the arising of the effect does exist on the relative level. But ultimately speaking, this concept is actually dependent origination and emptiness. It is not truly existent. When we examine it from four perspectives by refuting the four types of arising, we also cannot find any truly existent arising. Whether the seed has ceased or not, the sprout does not arise from either. Therefore you state that all arising is like an illusion. As Nagarjuna explains in this scriptural quotation, whether the seed has ceased or not, arising cannot occur in either case. If we analyze this according to absolute truth, we cannot say that there is contact between the sprout and the seed. If they are in contact, have the seed and the sprout become one entity? Following the logical reasoning in the way of the Bodhisattva, have they merged into one single entity? Have they merged? In fact, they have not. When examined in this way, the seed and the sprout can never merge into one. If they were to merge into one entity, it would lead to the fallacy of the seed becoming the sprout and the sprout becoming the seed. Conversely, if there is no contact between the seed and the sprout, does the sprout arise without a cause? No, it does not. Without a seed, a sprout cannot arise. If there is a relationship between the sprout and the seed, we should be able to observe it. However, no matter how we analyze it, their relationship cannot be found, so it cannot be established in this way. Yet there is a special causal connection between cause and effect. Otherwise, without the cause of the seed, the effect of the sprout could not be produced. What is the reason for this? Actually, the Buddha explained this long ago. This is the law of dependent origination. It arises in dependence upon causes and conditions. All phenomena arise from causes and conditions. All phenomena cease due to causes and conditions. This is a truth that only the great compassionate Buddha could proclaim with his lion's roar. Therefore, you should all understand this profound mystery of cause and effect. When we truly analyze this with reasoning, simultaneous cause and effect is also incorrect, and non-simultaneous cause and effect is also incorrect. Thus, both simultaneous and non-simultaneous cause and effect cannot be established under logical analysis. Since they cannot be established, does this mean the infallibility of cause and effect is unreasonable? Actually, the infallibility of cause and effect is correct. But this infallibility is a natural phenomenon on the relative level. We could also say it is reasonable within a specific set of conventional rules. However, in the ultimate nature of reality, this infallibility of cause and effect does not exist either. Some people claim that on the absolute level, all phenomena are empty, but cause and effect are not empty. In fact, this view is incorrect. The infallibility of cause and effect is valid only on the relative level. So when examining this, some beginners studying the middle way might read this and think, wait, first it says cause and effect are completely empty, that nothing exists at all. Then a moment later it seems to say that there is no difference between a cause and a non-cause. Although beginners might initially have such wrong views or conceptual thoughts, as you study more you will understand that these teachings are not contradictory. In fact, you will realize this is the only correct explanation. Without this decisive analysis, concepts like a truly existent cause and effect, truly existent arising from self, or truly existent arising from other, simply make no sense at all. So this is really important to understand. This law of cause and effect is crucial. As we progress in our study of the middle way, we eventually use our own reasoning to develop a profound certainty in dependent origination and emptiness. This certainty is not easily shaken by other intellects. It is a firm and unwavering conviction. This is exactly what is described in the beacon of certainty. Developing a very firm certainty is extremely important. Many people studying the Dharma today seem to be drifting aimlessly. They are merely satisfied with superficial practices like casting divinations, taking refuge, and making offerings. In reality, the profound meaning of dependent origination and emptiness, taught by the great compassionate Buddha, remains perplexed by some. Of course, there is also a considerable number of very good practitioners who, despite intense pressures from work and family, continue to study persistently. And I know that some of our Dharma friends wake up at 4 a.m. to study this text, then study another text in the evening and another one on Sundays. Basically, every day they are even more diligent than some of our monastics. We have some monastics who, when they used to be with their teachers and Dharma friends, were slightly more diligent, but later they became lax. Once they relaxed, they completely lost their self-discipline. I once told a Tibetan monastic, "Don't tell me you have a study plan. You haven't even scheduled your study for a single morning or afternoon, let alone for an entire day, nor for a month, nor for a year. In that case, how are you spending your life? Muddling through today, muddling through these past 2 weeks, and muddling through the past half year. If you continue like this, given how precious our lives and time are, if you do not listen, reflect or practice during this precious time, and you do nothing beneficial for society or yourself, and you just drift through life as long as you have enough food to survive. It is truly unacceptable. Since we have encountered such an excellent teaching on dependent origination and emptiness, we should at least taste its exquisite flavor. If we do that, we won't need to go around begging heaven and earth for this or that, or desperately searching for samsara. What makes a master truly extraordinary? In reality, if a master's mind stream possesses genuine compassion and wisdom, then this master is truly extraordinary. Otherwise, if someone is merely a master in appearance, of course you can still pay respects, make offerings, and take refuge in them, and all of that is fine. But what do we truly need? We need the Buddha's most definitive wisdom of reality, where compassion and wisdom are indivisible. Compassion and wisdom are extremely important. Next, we will refute arising from other when cause and effect are simultaneous. If I consciousness has a simultaneous cause, the I, perception, and so forth are distinct from it. What is the use of arising for something that already exists? If you say it does not exist, the faults have already been explained. Next, we will refute the opponent's view. The opponent here primarily refers to the Vaibhashika school, which is the Vaibhashika school within the Theravada tradition of Buddhism, because the Sautrantika school of the Theravada tradition believes I consciousness arises in dependence upon an object. Therefore, the object exists in the preceding instant, and the I consciousness exists in the subsequent instant. The two are not simultaneous, but the Vaibhashika school believes the I consciousness and the external object arise at the exact same time. For example, when I see an external object of form, the form appears externally, and my I consciousness arises simultaneously. The two form a relationship at the exact same time. They hold this rather unique view, which we frequently refute in the Abhidharmakosha as well. So the Vaibhashika school holds the view that the object and the subject function simultaneously. This is what they believe. So how do they demonstrate this? They say I consciousness can have simultaneous causes. They provide an analogy. For instance, regarding cause and effect, although a preceding cause and a subsequent effect are unreasonable, as we have already explained earlier, the Vaibhashika school believes that the phenomenon of simultaneous cause and effect does exist. How does it exist? They say, for example, when my eyes see a form at that very moment, accompanying the I consciousness or acting as its subsidiary, there will correspondingly arise perception, feeling, contact, intention, and mental engagement. These are the 5 omnipresent mental factors. When we discuss the 51 mental factors, we mentioned that whenever any main mind or mental factor arises, it must inevitably be accompanied by what? It is accompanied by other mental states, which are called the 5 omnipresent mental factors. For example, when the I consciousness arises, it is accompanied by the 5 mental factors of perception, feeling, contact, intention, and mental engagement. These all exist in a subsidiary manner. When this I consciousness arises, the corresponding mental factors fall into 2 categories: the 5 omnipresent mental factors and the 5 object-determining mental factors. The 5 object-determining mental factors include desire, resolve, and so on. However, these types of mental factors are sometimes present and sometimes absent. When we studied the main mind and mental factors, we discussed these topics in more detail. In short, the Vaibhashika school believes that I consciousness can have simultaneous causes. For example, when a person generates eye consciousness, at the same time they possess their eye faculty, and the external object is the form. When the eye consciousness arises simultaneously, you also have certain perceptions and feelings, as well as some thoughts and intentions. These all arise at the exact same time. The Vaibhashika school believes that these external forms act as the cause for the eye consciousness. That is to say, the causes of the eye consciousness are the various external conditions. Therefore, these conditions, including the external forms, are the causes, and the eye consciousness is the effect. Yet the two are simultaneous. Of course, when we study Buddhist logic, this view of the Vaibhashika school is extremely easy to refute. Their view simply cannot be established. Let me ask, if your view could be established, which one is the cause and which one is the effect? That leads to the fallacy of simultaneous cause and effect mentioned earlier. If cause and effect were simultaneous, it would lead to fallacies such as the effect having no need to arise. Using this reasoning, their view is easily overthrown. So what we just discussed is the view of the Vaibhashika school. Actually, when Master Fazun translated this part, he should have added a word at the beginning of the stanza or included a pronoun indicating that this is the opponent's stance. Having such an indicator in the stanza makes it easier to understand. The following stanza is the middle way school refuting the Vaibhashika school. What is the use of arising for something that already exists? If you hold this view, it is unreasonable. Cause and effect the cause is already present, and then it produces the effect again. This entails the fallacy of repeated arising. What would be the use of that? The cause is already present to begin with. If there is also an effect existing at the exact same time, then there is no need for this effect to arise, because the effect already exists within the preceding cause, resulting in the fallacy of simultaneous cause and effect. If you deny this and say cause and effect are not simultaneous, we have already completed that refutation earlier. If cause and effect are not simultaneous, we already refuted that when we negated distinct entities. So here's what's essential to grasp. For any phenomenon, as long as cause and effect are regarded as truly distinct entities, arising cannot be established. Conversely, if there is arising, it cannot be simultaneous or a distinct entity. These two are absolutely impossible to establish. Therefore, in the external world, no phenomenon whatsoever can be established as having truly existent arising. If there is no inherently existent arising, then all phenomena are actually non-arising. This truth of non-arising is also the ultimate reality of all phenomena. By observing the nature of phenomena in this way, everything is like space. I recall this is stated in the Avatamsaka Sutra. By observing the nature of phenomena in this way, everything is like space, devoid of arising and ceasing. This is what the bodhisattvas attain. This means that, in reality, all phenomena are like space, devoid of arising and ceasing, but this is not the state of ordinary beings. Rather, it is the state of bodhisattvas. This is not a realization reached by ordinary beings, it is the realization of bodhisattvas. Therefore, it is only on the relative level that the principle of causes giving rise to effects can be established. Up to this point, we have refuted the views that cause and effect are either simultaneous or non-simultaneous. Next is refuting the effect by examining it through four alternatives. This means refuting it by analyzing the effect through four logical possibilities. Does the producing cause that generates a distinct produced effect generate an effect that is existent, non-existent, both, or neither? If it exists, what is the use of arising? If it does not exist, what benefit is there? Both and neither are equally useless. This is an analysis from the perspective of the effect. Earlier, we refuted the notions of distinctness and inherent existence from the perspective of the cause. Now, moving forward, we will analyze this using another approach. If a cause is required to produce an effect, we must ask the opponent, regarding this effect you speak of, does an inherently existent effect arise, or does an inherently non-existent effect arise? Or does an effect that is both inherently existent and inherently non-existent arise? Or does a phenomenon that is neither inherently existent nor non-existent arise? We ask them in this way. If an already existent effect arises, there is no need for it to arise again because it already exists. If a non-existent effect arises, then for something that does not exist to begin with, no one can possibly make it arise. Therefore, asserting an effect that is both existent and non-existent is contradictory, and in reality it is completely impossible to arise. Furthermore, an effect that is neither outside of being existent or non-existent does not exist in this world either. So this is a very interesting method of analysis. In the past, there was a Dharma friend at our academy who thought this theory was brilliant, and every day he would just he acted like this every single day. However, the debates in the past seemed to be one-on-one on a much smaller scale. When listening from the side, we could basically understand what was going on. Now, the debating style in Tibetan Buddhism has changed somewhat. We might not be very familiar with this new style of debating. Watching them is almost like watching a dance. A dozen people will simultaneously clap and shout, "Bah!" and then everyone starts laughing. We have no idea what the other side is saying. It seems like they have all been trained in advance. Then, at the exact same time, everyone claps together. Debates did not used to be like this. People would come up one by one. One person would state a thesis and the other would begin to refute it. In that setup, the victory or defeat between the two was relatively easy to discern. Nowadays, one or a few people sit there, while a dozen people on the other side use the exact same motion and collectively shout, "Bah!" and then it is over. I don't know what is going on. Perhaps it was all choreographed beforehand. So what is being discussed here is regarding this effect you speak of. Does an existent effect arise, or does a non-existent effect arise? We analyze this through four possibilities, and aside from these four alternatives, no inherently existent effect that is distinct from its cause can be established. We can also explain it this way in our daily lives. Our school states here, if the effect is already present upon the cause, there is no need for it to arise again. The root stanzas of the Middle Way says, if the effect definitely possesses inherent nature, why would a cause produce it? If the effect definitely lacks inherent nature, why would a cause produce it? If the effect has an existent nature, meaning it already exists, what need is there for the cause to produce it? There is no need. If the effect has a non-existent nature, just like the son of a barren woman, who could possibly produce it? It would also be ineffective. So the stanza here says, does the producing cause that generates a distinct produced effect generate an effect that is existent, non-existent, both or neither? Produces a distinct entity refers to the produced effect and the producing cause. Generate means what is being generated. Is it generating an existent effect or generating a non-existent effect? Is it generating an effect that is both existent and non-existent, or an effect that is neither? Among these four, which one does your school assert? The first two lines of the stanza pose this question to the opponent. Next, we will begin to refute each one of them systematically. What is the use of arising? If you say that the effect is already fully present upon the cause, if the effect, just as we explained earlier when refuting the Samkhya school, if the effect is already fully present upon the cause, then since the effect already exists, what need is there for it to arise? To arise and then arise again is also unreasonable. As mentioned earlier, for something to arise and then arise again is also unreasonable. Our school asks, regarding the effect you assert, is it existent or non-existent upon the cause? If you say it is existent, then if it already exists, there is no need for it to arise again. Since the effect already existed, there is no need for it to repeatedly arise. Having the cause is sufficient. There is no need to produce the effect. This is the first point. Second, if a non-existent effect arises, meaning there was no effect previously, if there was no effect previously, how could it arise now? As stated in the 400 verses, if it is this kind of non-existent arising, then all efforts would be in vain. It is also stated in the way of the Bodhisattva, even through countless causes and conditions, what is non-existent can never become existent. Even if 100 million causes are fully present, they cannot change non-existence into existence. For something that has never existed, like the son of a barren woman, even if countless causes and conditions are present, it is impossible to make the son of a barren woman arise. If something is non-existent, even if it relies on millions of causes, it still cannot be produced. If something is non-existent, no matter what conditions it relies upon, it is impossible to arise. Therefore, both the effect being present in the cause and the effect being absent from the cause are impossible to establish. Then, let us analyze the combination of the effect being present in the cause and the effect being absent from the cause. which means producing an effect that is simultaneously existent and non-existent in one entity. But this does not exist in the world either. For any entity, if it is existent, it is not non-existent, and if it is non-existent, it is not existent. It is also impossible for these two to exist simultaneously in one entity. For example, if this phenomenon is both existent and non-existent, where could you find such a phenomenon? For instance, for this seed to produce a phenomenon that is both existent and non-existent, that is impossible. The most contradictory concepts in the world are existence and non-existence. If something is existent, it is definitely not non-existent, and if it is non-existent, it is definitely not existent. These two cannot possibly coexist. Let us analyze the fourth scenario, neither existent nor non-existent, meaning it is neither existent nor non-existent. Such a phenomenon does not exist anywhere in the world either. What might be called a third category of entity or anything like that does not exist in the world. Therefore, when we truly analyze using wisdom, in reality, existence and non-existence are contradictory. So, if the effect exists on the cause, it does not need to arise because it already exists. A non-existent effect also cannot arise. So the phenomenon that is both existent and non-existent cannot arise either. And a phenomenon that is neither existent nor non-existent outside of those two is also highly laughable and cannot be found anywhere. So when we analyze it this way, we can sometimes ask others, tell me, is there a connection between cause and effect? The other person might say, yes, there is. Then you can ask further, if there is, let me ask you, does an existent effect arise, or does a non-existent effect arise? Or does an effect that is both arise, or does an effect that is neither arise? If you say an existent effect arises, then it does not need to arise again. The effect already exists, so what is there to arise? If it still needed to arise, it would be like having already given birth to a son, yet needing to give birth to him again. The first son would be useless. One would have to keep producing sons possessing their own defining characteristics. If it is a non-existent effect, how can you produce it? Because it fundamentally does not exist and is an unestablished entity. For an unestablished entity, no matter how hard you try, you cannot make it arise. Therefore, existence and non-existence are contradictory, and aside from these two, an effect that is neither existent nor non-existent also does not exist. In this way, in reality, whether it is modern scientists or anyone else, based on this theory of the middle way, if we were to debate fairly, it would still be very difficult for the opponent to establish their view. We frequently encounter various scholars who believe your Buddhist concept of cause and effect must be incorrect, or they think your view that all phenomena are empty is unreasonable. If that is the case, if you claim they are not empty, please provide your reasoning for why they are not empty. Let us put aside other reasons for now and just discuss how this cause and effect are produced. Does an existent effect arise, or does a non-existent effect arise? Debating with them purely on the point of arising, when examined through reasoning, the opponent simply cannot maintain their stance. However, sometimes they lack any theoretical foundation or any basis for argument at all, yet they still cling to habitual deep-rooted attachments. In fact, many modern scientists simply turn their own subjective terms into seemingly rational theories and draw conclusions from them, and they consider this to be scientifically established. In reality, science also finds it extremely difficult to establish many things. For example, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, regarding the claim that consciousness is produced in our brain, some people believe that consciousness is produced in the brain. But regarding this view that consciousness is produced in the brain, let's leave the absolute truth aside for a moment and just look at relative reality. Even there, no biologist, no physicist, no scientist of any kind has been able to point to a specific region of the brain and say this is the cause that produces consciousness. For instance, could the cause that produces consciousness be located in a specific part of our brain? Or before this consciousness is even produced, is there a very specific cell? And this cell is the cause that can produce consciousness. The scientific community has yet to find the answer to this, even up to today. If it hasn't been found, then saying consciousness is produced in the brain is simply empty talk. If one believes, it seems the brain exists and consciousness exists, so there must be a connection between the two. Even if there is a connection, to claim that consciousness is the effect of the brain is certainly an unreasonable statement. It is just like when two people have a close relationship and you insist on identifying their relationship as father and son. This is unreasonable even from a worldly perspective. If the brain is truly the cause that can produce consciousness, you must present your demonstration. Either your data must be accurate, you must have sufficient data, or you must have evidence, namely the reason for your demonstration, which is what we call the logical reason here. Therefore, when many people today say, our consciousness is produced from within the brain, it is merely their own subjective claim, then they attach a fine scientific label to it. This is what scientists believe. This is the scientific view. In fact, some scientific views do not have any particularly reliable theories backing them up. This phenomenon is quite common nowadays. Therefore, regarding the Buddhist principle that all phenomena are empty, if opponents do not accept it, we can use these reasonings to analyze the issue. During analysis, on one hand, if others say all phenomena are not empty or cause and effect are established, we can certainly refute inherently existent cause and effect. Or if they claim something arises from a non-cause, just like the earlier claim that consciousness is produced in the brain, this is arising from a non-cause. So, which scientist stated this view? Which biologist stated it? Which physicist stated it? We can press them with these questions. Furthermore, if scientists believe this is the case, how is the relationship between its cause and effect demonstrated? Today, through science, we also know that the brain is a lump of meat weighing 1.4 kilograms, and within this lump of meat there are many nervous systems. But exactly which region of the brain's nervous system has become the cause of present consciousness, to this day the scientific community lacks a reasonable explanation. Meanwhile, many tantras in our Buddhist tradition also discuss the relationship between the nerves and consciousness. Although they do not have a relationship of producing cause and produced effect, there are concepts regarding how they mutually influence and interact with one another. Therefore, regarding these aspects, we can simultaneously learn about them as well. Next, we will discuss dispelling worldly contradictions, which is divided into two parts. First, stating the debate regarding worldly contradictions, and second, the response. First, let us look at the first point. Worldly beings consider their own direct perception as valid cognition. So what is the use of speaking of reasoning here? Arising from other is also known to the world, therefore arising from other is established. What is the use of reasoning? The opponent is being quite clever here. Whether cause and effect are simultaneous or non-simultaneous, they couldn't establish either just now, could they? They couldn't articulate a true reason to establish arising from other. So at this point, the opponent adopts a different approach. They say, the relationship between cause and effect doesn't need all this reasoning. What is the use of all this messy reasoning? None of this is needed. Then what is needed? It is simply the facts directly perceived by worldly people today. These are all very realistic. These realistic things don't need theory. The opponent says worldly beings consider their own direct perception as valid cognition. When we worldly beings abide in our own views, we consider them to be valid cognition. We accept what we see and hear as truly valid cognition. All the myriad phenomena are determined in this way, relying on our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. They can be confirmed like this. What is the use of speaking of reasoning here? Regarding this, what need is there for you to demonstrate things like cause and effect are simultaneous, or cause and effect are non-simultaneous? I am tired of hearing all these statements, so stop talking about them. This is because the opponent cannot answer. Saying they are simultaneous is incorrect, and saying they are non-simultaneous cannot be established either, so they say none of this is needed. Generally speaking, these involve reasoning based on inference. For these hidden and profound phenomena that cannot be perceived directly, their truth can be uncovered through reasoning. Then the opponent says, arising from other is also known to the world. This kind of inherently existent cause and effect, here they are referring to the effect. The opponent argues, the effect arises from an inherently existent other. This is known to everyone in the world. If you ask a farmer, does planting crops produce a result? They will answer, yes, yes, yes. Foolish people say this, and wise people also say this. Anyone in the world who understands the concept of cause and effect even a little, whether they are nobles or commoners, everyone knows this fact. Everyone will say, these two have a relationship of cause and effect. This is how it is expressed in the world. Planting crops in the spring yields a harvest in the autumn. These two have a relationship of cause and effect. Actually, this is not complicated, because it is something everyone knows. Therefore, arising from other exists. What is the use of reasoning? Therefore, we directly assert that cause and effect arise from other. Since everyone in the world says so, there is no need to persistently demonstrate it. This is also a perspective, and it sounds quite reasonable. Indeed, in our worldly life, everyone says this son was born from that mother, and the calf was born from the cow. Or they say this flower was produced from its seed. Everyone accepts this concept of arising from other, and this arising from other occurs without reasoning. Of course, this is actually an extremely coarse concept in the world, merely a habitual notion. For example, someone might be given the name Buddha. That doesn't make them an actual Buddha. Or someone might be nicknamed Old Pig, like the character Jubaji from Journey to the West. In reality, amid these phenomena, being named Jubaji doesn't make them an actual pig. Not necessarily, but in people's conceptualization, including the relationship between cause and effect, farmers say, the cause produces the effect, and since childhood we also feel that the cause produces the effect. But strictly speaking, worldly people do not understand at all the relationship of homogeneous continuity between cause and effect. Therefore here, as Chandrakirti also explained in his auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way, when touching upon such an issue, ignorant ordinary beings in the world have very heavy habitual tendencies of ignorance from beginningless time. If you suddenly tell them it is unestablished on the absolute level, but established on the relative level, saying it like that, they simply won't understand. So we must explain it to them gradually, unfolding the principles of the absolute truth and the relative truth. The subsequent content gradually explains the absolute truth and the relative truth to these worldly people. Actually, when we teach, we explain under what circumstances cause and effect exist, and under what circumstances cause and effect do not exist. For example, they exist on the relative level but do not exist on the absolute level. However, regarding existence on the relative level, there is the false conventional truth and the real conventional truth. Within the false conventional truth, what phenomena cannot be established even conventionally, these are false. Conversely, within the real conventional truth, they are accepted as existing. We must begin an extensive explanation of these aforementioned profound theories to worldly people, otherwise with just a few words the opponent won't be able to comprehend it at all. Therefore, in the commentary on the 60 stanzas on reasoning and the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way, Chandrakirti felt at this point that generally worldly people say cause and effect arise from other. Regarding this, we have just theoretically refuted it. Simultaneous cause and effect arising from other is unestablished, and non-simultaneous is also unestablished. Then the worldly people say, that's fine, that's fine. We all just accept that arising from other exists. In this case, it cannot be clearly explained in just a few words. If we simply state the reasoning that arising from other does not exist, they still won't quite understand. So we must say to these worldly people, come, sit down and let us explain it slowly. Actually, the world is divided into the two truths. Next, we will begin to answer from the perspective of the two truths. This is the true response. The true response is divided into two aspects. Although the world accepts arising from other, it does not contradict worldly convention. This is the first point. And the second is, although there is no inherently existent arising from other on the relative level, it also does not contradict worldly convention. Actually, this structural outline is crucial. If you truly wish to study Entering the Middle Way in the future, this structural outline is extremely important. Each of the following stanzas serves as a summary. Let's look at the first one. Although the world accepts arising from other, the reasoning does not contradict worldly convention. Didn't we just say that arising from other contradict worldly convention? Well, although the world accepts arising from other, it is not contradictory to worldly convention. This principle is explained in three aspects. First, regarding objects and subjects, explaining the establishment of the two truths by differentiating between unmistaken and mistaken. Because phenomena where objects and subjects are mistaken are primarily these appearances within our relative truth. Phenomena apprehended through an unmistaken subject and object belong to the ultimate truth. Next, we will explain this extensively, and then summarize with the view that they are not mutually contradictory. It is divided into these three aspects. First of all, our objects and subjects are divided into two types, unmistaken and mistaken. From this, the two truths are established. Therefore, the following scriptural quotations are actually frequently cited in various sutras and shastras. You should all be quite familiar with them, so I do not need to explain them too extensively here. Because phenomena are perceived as either true or false, they are said to possess two aspects. The object of true perception is called the absolute truth, while the object of false perception is called the relative truth. Next, we will discuss what we commonly call the absolute truth and the relative truth. If some of you feel that our method of establishment is somewhat unreasonable, you do not need to be nervous or afraid. Just calm your minds and listen as I slowly explain it to you. Among all the teachings taught by the Buddha, they may be broadly divided into two categories. One is the teachings of the absolute truth, and the other is the teachings of the relative truth. Regarding the teachings of the absolute truth, the subject and object are dissolved into the Dharma Dhatu, and not a single phenomenon is established. These are like the objects perceived by the noble bodhisattvas. Then, regarding the teachings of the relative truth, the subject and object are not destroyed at all. The phenomena that we ordinary beings know and perceive are called the relative truth. Therefore, this text states here, because all phenomena are seen as either true or false, because for all phenomena, due to the different spiritual levels of the perceivers, what they see also differs. Noble beings see the true reality, while ordinary beings see false appearances. These two perceivers have different spiritual levels. It is not that the phenomena themselves have a distinction of being true or false. Actually, the nature of all phenomena is the same. But what ordinary beings see with their deluded consciousness are delusive appearances, while what noble beings see in the state of fundamental meditative equipoise is the absolute reality. Thus we have the division of the two truths. This is when we arrive at the two natures. What kind of two natures do we arrive at? True perception refers to the genuine state of reality seen by noble beings. This state is what we call the absolute truth. It is also called the absolute truth, the Tathagata Garbha, or the primary meaning. As the Lankavatara Sutra also states, conditioned phenomena are the conventional truth. Non-existence of intrinsic nature is the ultimate meaning. In many Chinese translations, the absolute truth is called the primary meaning, and the relative truth is called the conventional truth. There are various names like these. Therefore, if it is genuinely the phenomena perceived by a noble being in fundamental meditative equipoise, it is called the absolute truth, meaning the ultimate truth. The phenomena perceived by ordinary beings through deluded subject-object duality or through the appearances of arising and ceasing are called the relative truth. So when we study the middle way, it is truly very important to analyze the relative truth and absolute truth separately. When I taught the Diamond Sutra in the past, I primarily explained it by distinguishing between the absolute truth and the relative truth. Within the relative truth, in the face of false temporary appearances, everything has arising and ceasing. But in the true absolute truth, or to a noble being in fundamental meditative equipoise, all appearing phenomena are fundamentally unestablished. After explaining these principles, many people also felt it was quite clear. Therefore, we should know here that regarding the fundamental nature of phenomena, there is no inherent need for a distinction between true and false. It is not like that. However, in the process of various perceivers coming to understand phenomena, some realize the true nature of all phenomena without error. Others not only fail to realize it truly, but actually engage in mistaken and inverted cognition. From this arises the distinction between the absolute truth and the relative truth, which correspond to the objects perceived by noble beings and ordinary beings. The principle of the two truths serves as the basis for determining all pure and impure phenomena. That is why Khenpo Depa quoted some teachings by Mipham Rinpoche from the commentary on the adornment of the middle way. Actually, this teaching is also very important, because within the scope of everything we know, understanding the absolute truth and the relative truth is extremely important. Furthermore, the relative truth is divided into the true relative truth and the false relative truth. We will also explain this principle later. And the absolute truth is also divided into the genuine absolute truth and the nominal absolute truth. Furthermore, the absolute truth and the relative truth can be classified according to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, or according to the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. Actually, regarding the establishment of the two truths, there are many concepts and many profound principles within them. So if you are studying the middle way, you should frequently contemplate this in your daily life. Look at the teachings of the great masters of the past, and at the same time, you should carefully contemplate the true meaning of this Dharma. I feel that if you are willing to put in the effort, you should be able to learn it well. In our current study of entering the middle way, we're relying on two main sources. On one hand, there's Chandrakirti's own Vajra words. his root stanzas, along with his method of analysis. All of this is organized according to the outline that the omniscient Mipham Rinpoche laid out. Then the commentary on this treatise primarily relies on Chandrakirti's own auto-commentary. Later, Khenpo Depa Rinpoche explained it using an excellent, easy-to-understand vernacular style. He elucidated it in this way. Furthermore, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche and Khenpo Depa have all received abundant blessings from Mipham Rinpoche. For example, at the end of this commentary, at that time Khenpo Depa himself also praised him with deeply moving verses, stating that the omniscient Mipham Rinpoche is an emanation of Manjushri. He also said that Mipham Rinpoche, through the display of Manjushri, severed the ignorance and wrong views within his own mind stream, and simultaneously enabled him to gain a certain level of realization and understanding of the middle way views. Then Khenpo Depa could not help but to express these praises in the interposing verses. The general meaning is probably like this. Actually, when the great masters of the past composed treatises, the interposing verses that flowed from them are quite fascinating, because many of the great masters of the past are not like us ordinary beings who just indulge in empty talk, where in reality the words might not contain any real substance. But for these great masters of the past, every single word and sentence of theirs is truly invaluable, containing incredibly profound pith instructions. Thus, I think we need to have a clear understanding of ourselves. Everyone should reflect. So among the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma by the great compassionate Shakyamuni Buddha, the Prajnaparamita teachings are so extraordinary, and such profound Prajnaparamita teachings were presented by Chandrakirti in such clear and accessible language. Later great masters also composed various commentaries and then explained them to us. This is wonderful. So in my heart I have always felt that regarding the profound meanings found in entering the middle way and the root stanzas of the middle way, I didn't know what method to use to help more people understand them. So at that time, whether I was translating the clear words or translating Khenpo Depa's commentary on entering the middle way, it might look like just 200 or 300 pages to you, as if it were nothing much. But how should I explain this? Actually, translating a book is not that simple. It's not like just building a house. It is not that straightforward. It requires repeatedly pondering over it, repeatedly proofreading it, and regarding the content, meaning, and wording, it takes a lot of thoughts and deliberation. If there is even a single typo, everyone will think, wow, there's a typo. Today, while I was shaving my head, I was thinking, actually, we people are always like this. If in the end there is just one strand of hair that isn't shaved properly, when we look at it, it feels like an eyesore. So sometimes during the translation process, if there is a single typo, it becomes an eyesore to everyone. I could translate 100 words flawlessly, but if there is one typo, everyone will say, wow, your translation is no good. There is a typo here. It's very glaring. So I also poured my heart and soul into compiling these books. I personally believe it was truly not easy. I hope that for such excellent Dharma, everyone should receive a fully comprehensive way to study it. Therefore, at the back of the Dharma text, there are also some meditation practices on entering the middle way. Although the meditation practices are not extensive, just a few pages, you should still read them. In this lifetime, when we encounter these teachings on emptiness, we shouldn't just tell others, I have listened to teachings on the middle way. I have listened to entering the middle way. Studying the Dharma is not just for showing off to others. Rather, through this study, we must generate genuine certainty in the truth of the non-arising of all phenomena. If we do, the great matter of liberation from life and death will be resolved in this lifetime. The seeds of life and death will have been destroyed, and there will be no need to wander in the three realms of existence again. This is not what I am saying. This was stated by Arya Deva, as quoted earlier. Whoever generates even a slight doubt will destroy the three realms of existence. So I think in the process of our study, the classification of the two truths and these principles of the two truths are very important. But due to time constraints, I will not elaborate further here. We will conclude today's teaching here.
Bandangara Padma Sada Bandangara Padma Sada